That was so close. Hello, and welcome to IRL JAKS, where I take you through my everyday life and my infertility journey in hopes that you'll join me along the way or get some inspiration for your own journey. Today, unfortunately, I have to tell you about my D&C and miscarriage. I want to talk about what happened, what we know now, how I'm doing now, and my tips for getting through the D&C and a miscarriage. If you find anything in this video helpful, or you have tips of your own, feel free to leave them in the comments below. First, I want to give a quick recap of my infertility journey so far, which I'll be making a more in-depth video about later. This miscarriage came almost 1 year to the date from the time that we found out about our infertility, and this pregnancy was a result of our first injectable cycle with gonal F and Femara. Obviously, it was successful, but in the end, it didn't work. So because we were dealing with a fertility clinic already, they let you have ultrasounds really early. So our first ultrasound was on February 6th, which was 6 weeks and 4 days into our pregnancy. And we did get to see a fetal pole then. The fetal pole was only 82 beats per minute, but at that stage, when it's so early, that could have just been the first few days of a heartbeat or not. So even though it was kind of good news coming out of that appointment, it was still right on the bubble where it's like, well, some cases this was fine, some cases this wasn't. So we went away trying to be hopeful, but preparing ourselves for the worst. We then got sent in again a week later to get another ultrasound. And unfortunately, this is when we found out that the fetal pole had decreased to 49 beats per minute, which is just beyond where a viable pregnancy can go. My doctor was really sweet about it, but it's just such a horrible moment to be faced with that reality. She told us we had to keep coming in until the fetal pole would reach 0 before they could schedule D&C. I held it together in the doctor's office and the ride home, but not so much once we got home, obviously. And that brings me to my first tip for dealing with miscarriage, and that's designate a tellerer. And by that, I mean have someone that's going to tell everybody that it didn't go well. There's no need for you to be making those calls over and over and over again to let anybody know that you've told already that it's not going to go as planned. Luckily, we had just told our parents and a few close friends. So I designated my husband. He texted everyone to let them know what had happened. He also texted some friends that didn't even know I was pregnant, that I did want to know that I was going through this and that I was going to go through this surgery. Like, I needed that support system around me. My second tip, and it's something that I did a few days after that first ultrasound with bad news, I went and put away all of the pregnancy things I had gotten, pregnancy books, bra expanders, anything like that, or any gifts that people have given you already. Just put them away. You don't need a visual reminder of what's going on. You already have physical symptoms still, because especially for me, I had to wait another week past that bad news ultrasound to finally see the fetal pole go to 0, and then another week and a half to schedule a D&C. So there was several weeks where I was feeling pregnant and knew I wasn't going to get a baby at the end of it. So that's just a really difficult thing. You don't need any more reminders. Speaking of reminders, get rid of all of your pregnancy apps, and more than that, make sure that you tell the accounts to stop. Whether that's delete your account, or some of them are kind enough to include an end pregnancy option, go ahead, delete those accounts, then delete the apps, and unsubscribe from the emails. Goodness knows how all of these companies got my email, but it only takes one company selling your email before you're inundated with a bazillion emails. So unsubscribe from those lists, get rid of those apps. Again, don't need any more reminders. You're well aware of what's happening. My next tip is to delete your browsing history and your internet cache. And I know that sounds kind of sketchy, but a lot of these sites, Facebook, Amazon, they have it cached that you are pregnant, that you've been looking at pregnancy things, that you've been searching for baby things, and are then going to tailor their ads and suggestions to that. You don't need to be scrolling through Facebook and seeing an ad for diapers. Not necessarily. Save yourself the trouble on all of your devices, clear the internet history, clear the internet cache. You'll be thankful that you did. And finally, the last tip deals with technology again, because it's just so embedded and technology instantly knows everything, and it has to do with your Pinterest. This is the trickiest one for me to de-pregnancyfy, and I'm still working at it a month after my D&C. So on Pinterest, the only way that I can find to de-babyfy, de-pregnancy it, is to just search and pin other things. So as much as you're tempted to pin some of these parenting things, like, you need to get away from that for just a minute. So go ahead, search for 20 different things, pin 20 different pins that have nothing to do with parenting or children. I know if you're like me, it's gonna be a rough ride, because I immediately pinned all of the things in hopes that I could become super parent via Pinterest. And so Pinterest really knows what's happening. Anyway, it took a long time, weeks and weeks of pinning other things to make it kind of stop suggesting parenting things 100% of the time. Still not totally successful, working on it. So those are my tips just for getting through a miscarriage and dealing with the aftermath of that. Next, I'm going to talk about the D&C procedure and how I'm doing now 1 month post miscarriage. There are several different ways to miscarry, but because of how many weeks along I had to get a D&C. Now, the D&C procedure is an outpatient surgical procedure that will take place usually in a hospital or a surgically qualified doctor's office. It's only a 15-minute procedure, so it's not that big of a deal, and the risks are very minimal. The only risk that is concerning, and is much less of a concern nowadays than in the past, is Asherman syndrome. I'm very aware of it because I'm deeply embedded in the infertility community, but it's a syndrome that essentially causes permanent scar tissue on the inside of the uterus, thus making it hard to conceive. Again, this used to be much more prevalent when D&Cs were a much rougher procedure, but nowadays all doctors are trained to do what they call gentle D&C, which doesn't involve as much hard scraping. They're really in there on a mission and not just on a kind of brute force type ordeal. So the prep for a D&C is like all other surgeries: 12 hours before, no food and drink, and 2 hours before, no water. You are going to have to take a pregnancy test when you get there, which I was shocked by, and frankly, it was just like, really gonna just rub some salt up in those wounds? What is the point? What is the point? Whatever. You're gonna have to pee in a cup. So make sure you're drinking water right up until that deadline. And as soon as you get there, check in with a nurse to make sure that you're still on schedule for your scheduled time. I did not. I waited a bit until my surgery time had come and passed, until I finally asked a nurse, who informed me that, oh yes, my doctor was in with a previous patient nowhere near the end of surgery. Just not optimal. So if I'd asked earlier, I could have peed, given them my urine sample, still had more water, and not been so parched by the time I got back there. Because by the time I actually got taken back to get prepped, I was so dehydrated, they struggled to get an IV into me. It took about 5 tries to get an IV in me, and I took a bag and a half of fluid before I'd even hit my surgery time slot. And so that was the worst part. It was funny because after the procedure, I was waking up and they were giving me water and food and everything, like, are you okay? And I'm like, yes, I feel amazing because I've eaten and drank and you pumped me full of fluids. I feel way better than before, of course. As far as pain goes, they gave me Tylenol during the procedure and a prescription for oxycodone afterwards, which I took advantage of because I'm not feeling no pain after that ordeal. Like, no. And frankly, after the pains, they said to expect period pains. I felt like they were much sharper than period pains, but they only lasted for a few days. The worst part and the most long-lasting pain was actually my throat from, I don't know if it's intubation, from being put under. That sucked. It was like a sore throat that lasted for a week. Really not super fun. Bleeding was super manageable. Nothing to write home about, and stopped, I think, right around a 1 week mark. So again, nothing unmanageable at all. You do have restrictions after the surgery. Obviously, nothing goes down there. You need to hold off until you stop bleeding, or 2 weeks is really the safe mark to resume activities. I guess another tip for recovery is get a counselor if you don't already have one. You don't need like a full-on therapist, but I definitely recommend getting a counselor. I already had one for dealing with infertility, and goodness gracious, is she worth every dang penny I pay her, because I always walk out of there with a game plan of what I'm going to work on for the next week as far as my emotions go, and I just find it really, really helpful. So I am a little over 1 month post-op. That makes it sound really serious. Post D&C, and here's what I know now. I took a pregnancy test a few days ago, and it was negative. That was right after the 1 month mark. So I have, well, I shouldn't say 0 HCG. I have at least 10 or less HCG left. So that's trending down as it should. Normally it takes 4 to 6 weeks for your HCG to bottom out again after a miscarriage. I also received the genetic testing results from the pregnancy. We chose to have the remains of the pregnancy sent off to a lab to be tested to see what was wrong with them. We also participated in a clinical trial, which was interesting. The results of that screening came back positive for trisomy 16, which is a genetic abnormality of the 16th chromosome, where there are 3 of them. It is 100% fatal in the type that we had, the complete trisomy, and usually results in a pregnancy loss between 8 and 15 weeks. It doesn't increase my chances for a miscarriage in the future, and doesn't carry any other risks. Totally random, can happen to anyone type of thing. Emotionally, I am doing way better. Right after the D&C, I was kind of having panic attacks, thinking about our next cycle of fertility medications, and now, thanks to the gracious healing power of time and working with my counselor, I am feeling much better about that, and we're looking to start a new cycle in a few weeks, which I will hopefully be documenting closely, because look, I learned how to talk to you guys. It's great. We'll probably be using the same protocol as before. I haven't talked to my RE about that yet, but I don't see why we'd change it, because that worked on the first try. And the final kind of cruddy thing that came out of this whole ordeal is my eyesight changed. It can happen because of fertility medications, and it's going to happen with pregnancy. Anybody getting pregnant, after you give birth or have a miscarriage, your eyesight gets all wonky. Sometimes it's temporary, sometimes it's permanent, but talking with my optometrist yesterday, she thinks it's definitely permanent at this point, because I'm over a month out from my D&C, but I have a -1 in my right eye now. So I can't see far away. It's getting blurry when I drive, especially driving at night. Just kind of cruddy, because my eyes were perfect. I got them corrected a few years ago, and so it's just cruddy to have to think about corrective lenses again. But oh well, things could be worse, I suppose. All right, so I think that wraps up this video and this story. If you have any questions about me, my infertility journey, our plans going forward, or the miscarriage and D&C, feel free to leave them below, and I will try to answer them. If you found this helpful in any way, please hit that like button. It really helps me out. And until next time, keep on going.